In this episode of the Financial Freedom Podcast, we explain why the government do not tell us the real rate of inflation. So, can you remember what the government tell us the level of inflation is, Ronnie?
Yes.
Go on.
About 2 to 3% a year.
Exactly that, yeah. And so that's gone up from about 0 to
We weren't
1%.
discussing it, I promise.
No. That's gone up from about 1%, which is about a year ago. So it has gone up. And what do I say? Well, not really what I say. What do some current economic thinkers, what do they say is the real rate of inflation?
Higher.
Much higher.
Higher.
Go on. So if it's...
I know the answer.
Yeah, well, go on, just say it.
Okay, 10%.
Yeah. So between 5 to 10%.
5 to 10.
Higher.
10.
Between 5 to 10% higher than what the government are telling us, they say.
Crazy.
They base that on the fact that in 1980 and then again in 1990 and actually subsequently since then, the government have been bending the rules. And we are going to explain why they do that. Okay, so let's just take a step back.
That's their job.
Whose job?
The government's job to bend the rules.
Right, let's take a step back, okay, and explain how the government sort of set the rules. What's kind of what goes into setting the rules, and that's what they call the Consumer Price Index. Okay, and now that is basically a basket of goods, not necessarily a shopping basket, but picture that for 1 second. Picture your trolley and throw in there healthcare, car insurance, your car, your shopping, your
Rent, mortgage.
Not rent or mortgage. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Right, not rent or mortgage, but kind of everything but that is basically what makes up what they call a consumer price index. Okay, and they work it out based on sort of the percentages of what your expenditure, and they work all these crazy formulas, and that's how they've come out with their 2%. Okay, now
so the government made the CPI.
Correct.
Consumer Price Index.
Good. Now let's compare that to some of the things that we know price is. Okay, so we deal in property, right? How much did property go up last year?
10 to 15.
Great.
To 20.
10 to 12, really.
All right.
Depending on the area. Well, London was only like 1%. But overall, across the board, depending on which month you go by, about 10%. So much higher than your 1-2% that the government are telling us about. Okay, what about copper? Do you remember we discussed copper really back in episode 1 or 2?
Doubled.
Copper doubled. Right, copper in phones and in the kitchen sink and cars. Copper doubled, right?
In a year.
In a year, okay? So that's much higher again. Dogs, do you remember we discussed dogs?
Dogs doubled?
Dogs doubled. Copper doubled, dogs doubled.
Oh, dogs in
Property
the CPI.
went. Dogs, yeah, pets will be in the CPI, okay?
Goldfish?
I don't know whether it's dogs, but yeah, animals, buying animals will I'm pretty sure will probably be in the CPI, okay? So all these things are things we know about. Do you remember the poor guy's bathroom?
Yeah,
What
he
happened to
wasn't
him?
impressed with his quotes.
Yeah, because it also doubled or went up a lot.
Builders' materials have gone up.
Exactly. So all these things that we know about are much higher than the 1 to 2%, which suggests that the government are fiddling the books, okay? If you just take a step back, then you look at the property prices having gone up. Okay, now this is not just the last year, 2 years, okay, these are examples we've given, but if you look at property prices, okay, since 1970, they've gone up in the UK on average. Do you remember do you want to guess what the average price was in 1970 of a house? God, this is a great question. Yeah.
4,500.
Great answer. Honestly, we haven't discussed that. 4,500, right? And do you know what it is today?
Oh, I was spot on.
Yeah, it's about somewhere between 4 and 4.5. I think it's just close to 4,000. But
paid for her house.
right, but yeah, I'm gonna gold star that. Right, today's prices.
Today's price.
Average price.
$250,000.
Yeah, exactly, $250,000. Great, let's swap seats. Right, so that's 26 times the amount. Okay, but if on actual official inflation figures, it's actually only 8 times. Okay, so something has gone wrong there. Okay, so we know that property prices.
8, 4, 24.
Are you working out the difference?
Yeah,
8 times difference, roughly.
4 times difference.
8 times. One's gone up 8 times. The other one's gone up 62 times. So roughly 8 times 8 is 64.
Right.
So 8 times basically we're being lied to, back to the power of 8, and that doesn't make sense. Okay, so something's going on with the figures, okay? And next week I'm going to explain how they do this, okay? But this week I want to concentrate on why they do this. Why are we being told the wrong inflation figure, okay? And it hasn't, this has not gone on for years and years and years, okay? Maybe sort of since 1980, 1990, but before then we weren't told the wrong figure, okay? So we are being told that now because the main reason, okay, is that government debt has spiraled out of control, okay?
How did they manage not to do that?
How did they manage to keep government debt down in the past? Because they're basically more and more, they're taking on more and more debt into the system. There's more and more money printing, there's more and more debt to pay for more and more things. So just taking...
Do we expect more as people?
As people I think we expect.
We want free healthcare, free schooling, free...
Yeah, and that was, an example is there's free school meals, which the government tried to pull back on last year, and Marcus Rashford got involved. People weren't happy, and that's the kind of example. Now that might be an extreme example, but people now want more. And we've got furlough, okay, and we've got all the other government money that was basically printed into the system, okay. So there's now the government took on a lot more debt, okay. Now they need, as a result, okay, they don't want inflation to be sky high. If inflation's sky high, okay, the amount that they have to pay on their to pay back their debt, the interest on their debt will go up. The interest rates will reflect the level of inflation, okay? Interest rates will go up, and the government will have to pay a lot more both on new debt, any new debt they want to create, or eventually on the existing debt that they've got, which would be terrible for the government, okay? Now the other problem with all of that is that interest rates would then go up, okay? Because if inflation is at 10%, you can't have interest rates at 0. Now I don't know the exact correlation between the two, but interest rates wouldn't remain as where they are now, which is basically 0. They would have to creep up, okay, because everyone would expect them to creep up. They wouldn't have such a large, they wouldn't accept such a large gap. Now you're going to tell me, but they are accepting such a large gap, or maybe you weren't going to tell me that. But actually,
I was working out if interest rates are higher,
yeah,
banks earn more.
No, not necessarily banks earn more, because the gap would be less between the two. Banks would charge more for you to borrow their sums of money, but they would pay more to savers. So I don't know what environment banks want the best, but they win either way. But what they really want is the economy to be pumping and to be working. Okay. Now, if interest rates suddenly shot up, or if suddenly it got revealed that inflation was much higher than it actually is, that system would fail. Okay. The borrowing, right? What do you think would happen to the borrowing if interest rates went up in that scenario? Because inflation was higher.
People won't borrow. Borrowing go down.
Correct. Right? And they go down a lot, right? Because you're suddenly saying it's going to take, say, 5% to borrow or 10% to borrow money, instead of actually borrowing money at the moment, which is much lower. You know, as we know for the mortgages, can be 1-2%. Well, they would shoot up to, say, 5, 6, 7, 8%. Suddenly people are going to want to borrow less. Now, at the moment, the economy is basically thriving on all this money, all this debt that's sloshing around. Everyone's loving it. Okay? Now, we'll stop loving it, and then that won't be good for the economy. Okay, so on all those fronts, it's not good for the government. And the final reason is, and this is quite a technical argument, but the social security, which basically means the benefits. So if someone, you'll know someone who's on benefits, okay? So that is how much they get is linked to the official CPI rate. Okay? So it went up last year, say 1%.
Remind me what CPI stands for.
Consumer Price Index. Okay, so it went up 1%, but what we're saying is that actually inflation should be 10%. Okay, so actually they should be getting an extra 10% on the benefits and an extra 10% on tax credits, which would obviously make a huge difference to the individuals, but more important is the government who's got to pay it all out. Okay, so these are all reasons why the government would want to keep the inflation rate much lower.
But if it's been wrong for 20, 30 years.
Yeah, and more increasingly wrong, I think, is actually is probably the point to make. Yeah. So it's getting worse, the difference.
It's getting a bit more obvious.
It's probably getting more obvious, and slightly more people are talking about it.